I hope that you've had a great start to the new year. I hope you had a great Christmas. Man, as we get into this New Year time, I always think about it in almost like looking at a book, right? You get those new books, man, and they can be like that thick or that thick, and you look at it and you know there's something good in there, right? You got that book on purpose, or maybe somebody gave it to you and said, you need to read this. And so you kind of have some semblance of an idea of what the gist of that book is. You know what it's kind of going to be about, so you get kind of excited about what it's going to be potentially. That's really exciting. And depending on the type of book, there's extra sections in there, not just the chapters, right? So if you get, Harry Potter or something, you kind of know what you're working with. You got chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, keep going. But if you get a different kind of book, say a biography, a nonfiction book, you're going to have different parts. Like maybe at the end, you'll have appendices or something, Appendix A, Appendix B, Appendix C. That's going to explain things you read in the book. You refer to it from time to time as you're going through. Or at the beginning, you'll have, say, the foreword in there. You'll have the foreword. Somebody says, I owe a deep debt of gratitude to my mother and to my father for this and that. Or maybe you'll have a thanks section there. Maybe you'll see the introduction. I got to tell you, I read a lot of books from time to time, and the introduction is my least favorite part of a book because I don't understand it. I'm just like, just add another chapter, man. I don't get it. But they always put that in there. And then sometimes, if you're real fancy, you'll read a book that has a prologue in it. And I don't know about you, but I had to look up what that meant the first time I saw it. There's a prologue that goes in with that. And if you're not familiar with the prologue, basically it's this section, this introductory section that goes before the book starts. And it is meant to frame and give context to everything that comes after it. Everything that comes later on. So for instance, if you were reading a biography, as I was recently on George Washington, you might read within that prologue how George Washington grew up in the wilds of colonial America. You might read how he experienced a lot of death in his life. You might read how he, even though he experienced a lot of death in his life, actually benefited from most of those deaths that took place. Ironically, like he would gain a big inheritance somehow. He would gain a manor of some kind, or a lot of money, or a position of some kind. And so later, as you start going through the book, you're not startled when it says his brother died and George inherited this estate. His uncle died and George inherited this estate. And George did this and George did that. And I wonder, for you and me, like if you were to go home today and you were to write your own autobiography, like you said, you know what, I'm not going to write the whole thing today. It takes way too long. But you started sketching out the ideas for your autobiography. What would be in your prologue? What would people know to kind of frame the story and give context for everything that's coming later? What would they need to know in there? And while you're thinking about it, think about this. There was this guy 2,000 years ago who wrote the biography of Jesus. And as he did that, he had to give a prologue, and he wanted to give context and to frame, well, really the story of everything. See, 2,000 years ago, the guy named John, who wrote this biography, was one of 12 of the first official and closest followers of Jesus. In fact, he was in the top 3. He was closest, one of the closest ones to Jesus. So he knew a lot, experienced a lot, had seen a lot, closer than even some of the other 12. Now, as time went on, and after Jesus died and was resurrected and ascended back to heaven, the 12 disciples, well, really 11, because Judas, as you might remember, betrayed Jesus, and he hanged himself, and spoiler alert. And then you had the 11 remaining, and then 10 of those were martyred for their faith as they went and spread the gospel all over the known world. And then only John remained, and he got to live in exile on the Isle of Patmos. And while he was there, he had attracted a large group of followers, people who said, I want to know what you know. I want to know what you think. So he wasn't always in Patmos. He lived on the mainland at some time, and after that he got exiled. But while he was there, he'd attracted this group of followers who believed in Jesus and wanted to follow Jesus. And he taught them. Jesus said he was returning. He was coming back. And so they lived with great expectation, just like he did. He expected his friend, his Lord, his King Jesus to come back at any moment. Well, as time went on and the Lord tarried, John began to wonder, is Jesus going to come back before I die? And as John got older, Jesus still hadn't come back. And so he saw all these people that he was supposed to be helping, and he was the last remaining apostle, the last one who had been with Jesus, who had seen Jesus in the flesh, who had watched Jesus open blind eyes, who had watched Jesus walk on water. He even got to see Jesus transfigured into this like heavenly state. He experienced the Jesus on the cross and the Jesus of the resurrection. He saw it all. He said, I need to write this down so that future generations, those coming afterwards, are going to be able to know exactly what happened with Jesus. So he goes to write this biography, and he starts it all off, and the way he starts it is like this: in the beginning. In the beginning. That's kind of a strange way to start, especially for a Jewish man like John. John was Jewish, and so were the other 12 disciples, and many of the first Christians, most of the first Christians were Jewish. And when they heard the words "in the beginning," they would have thought what many of you who grew up in or around church thought. In the beginning, the next word is supposed to be God, right? So in the beginning. When we talk about the beginning, though, we need to talk about how there's something that's already there. You see, for something to begin, there has to be a time when it was not. For something to begin, it has to be begun by somebody or something. That means there has to be something or someone outside of time or outside of that time. And when we talk about the beginning of creation, of all things, we mean that all things started at some point. That means somebody had, or something had to start that. And that somebody or something has to be eternal. So let's look at what John says was there in the beginning. The Word. That's a weird turn of phrase. In the beginning was the Word. What word? Whose word? Where did we get this word? Well, John is here drawing off of a few different streams of philosophical and religious thought in order to illustrate who Jesus was and who God is and how that all played out. So in Greek thought, there is this word logos. And here it's translated as word or the word. But it's not just a word. It's not just word. It can be translated as idea. Some have translated it as action. So word, idea, action, the word can be that. And then in Hebrew and in the ancient Near East, like the term would have been dabar, which in Hebrew circles, words can carry their own feet. They have a mind of their own a little bit. They take off running a little bit. And if you go back and read through the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, you'll see parts where they talk about the word of the Lord. And so the word of the Lord would often come to somebody and it would compel them to do something. They didn't even want to do it, but they had to do it because the word of the Lord was making it happen. The word of the Lord was creating things in real time and making it go. And so the word of the Lord would come to a prophet, and the prophet would be compelled to go off and do something. When the word of the Lord was spoken, you knew it was going to come to pass. John is pulling off of these ideas. He's even pulling off of the idea, if you go read in Proverbs, about this wisdom character. Wisdom is personified. It's kind of the right hand of God in some ways. John's pulling all of that together to talk about this word. Which is interesting, because now he's saying that this word is eternal. Right? We said that if there's going to be a beginning, then whatever's there before the beginning has to be eternal, because it's beginning the thing that's beginning. The only other thing I know that's eternal is God. So in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. Okay, well, that computes. That computes. We have an eternal God and an eternal Word, according to John here. If we're talking about God, God has to be eternal. Like in a purely theological, philosophical sense, let's talk about it for a moment, right? Because if you can create a God, then that's not God. When we talk about God, what we're meaning is the greatest, most supreme being you could ever possibly imagine, and then some. That's what we mean. And that God has to be eternal. That God can't have a beginning, and it can't have an end. So it makes sense that God is there in the beginning, but John is telling us that this Word is there with God. And not only that, the Word was God. In the beginning, the Word was God. Well, how does that work? You're with God and you was God? How does that go hand in hand? Let me ask you something. If you've ever created something, it starts where? In your brain. It starts in your mind. Right? And maybe it moves out from there. You talk about it. You dream about it. You start using your hands to create that thing, or whatever it is, maybe a piece of leather, a woodworking, or maybe you write a song, you paint something, you type something out, you make a really nice spreadsheet. I'm a big fan of spreadsheets. Right? But it starts in your brain. It starts in your mind, and it moves out from there. That's the same concept as that logos or that debar we were talking about earlier. It's the same kind of idea. Now, the thing is, let's just use the term, that logos, that word is part of you, but it's still separate from you. It's not fully you, but it's still not fully part of you either. It's still you. And that's what John is getting at, that this word was both with God and was God. Well, that makes sense, because if God is creating, then he would use his word. In fact, if we go back to Genesis 1, we'd see in the beginning God said this, let there be, make this happen. And then we find this out about this word. Through him, all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. So this word character, whoever it is, pretend you've never heard of Jesus, just for a second. Whoever this word character is the creator. All things were made through him. Nothing was made without this word character. Nothing. This word is the creator. So eternal and also the creator. And then we see this. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. Well, if you're the creator, then there has to be life in there. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. So the life that this creator, word, thing, person, character has is actually, well, it's the light for all humanity. And even though humanity grows dark, even though the world grows dark, I mean, that's the implication here, that the world has grown dark and the light shines and it won't be overcome by the darkness. It's still shining, right? You might say, well, what do you mean? I think the world's pretty dark. I see things all the time on the news. I see it when I open my phone and I read the news for that day. I get text messages about it. I see stuff on YouTube. Even on TikTok, it's there. I see really dark things. Josh, don't you know that the world is depraved? Don't you know that things are really, really bad? Don't you know that things are just getting worse? Well, I think John would respond to you and say, yeah, but the light's still shining, and the proof is that you're still breathing. The proof is that humanity still has life, and because of that, we can know that the light is still shining in the darkness. No matter how dark it seems, the light is still shining in the darkness and will not be overcome by it. That's important. Now, I want to pause for a moment, because I know we've done some heavy lifting with some philosophical concepts, and I know some of us, we want to come in and we just want to get the 3-point sermon. Some of us want to come in and we want to say, here's the tip to live your best possible life now and make $1 million. If I knew that, I don't think I'd tell you. I'd keep it to myself. But sometimes you got to do some heavy lifting, because your faith is worth that. Your faith in Jesus, following Jesus, is worth a heavy lift often. So let's recap what we've talked about so far. The first is, the Word created everything. The Word created everything. The second is, the world grew dark. We can accept that. But that's okay because the word's light shined in the darkness anyways. The word's light shined in the darkness anyways. Everything was good, sort of. Now, we could leave it there, but the question is, so what? What happens? And that's how a lot of us live our life. We believe that Jesus, or that God created the world, and we may even believe that Jesus is out there and has done great things and loves us, and we believe all of that, but we kind of live our lives in this so what phase, where nothing is really changed, nothing is really different or anything like that. Now, maybe I'm not describing you, maybe I'm describing somebody you know, or maybe a way that you lived in the past. You live your life in this so what phase. What does it really matter in the end? And so John doesn't want us to misunderstand. This is earth-shattering, revolutionary, radical good news. And he does it with this verse. He says, the true light, remember we were talking about the light and the darkness, the true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. A lot of you have heard that, and you maybe even heard it at Christmas time, and so it goes right past us. I want you to think about how crazy that is. That the Creator, right? If this light is the same as the word we've been talking about, we're using that synonymously now. We're using it interchangeably. This light is ultimately the Creator. This word is the creator of all of this stuff is now coming into the creation, stepping into the creation. Can you imagine if you were able to create something in your own capacity, right? You took a Mr. Rogers train set, you put a whole little family together and you put a little village there together and the train's going around. If you could somehow import yourself into that. My kids watch a show on Netflix, it's called Gabby's Dollhouse or something. And I watch it from time to time, and it's this girl, and she has a dollhouse. It's not ginormous, but I mean, it's big. It's bigger than any dollhouse I had, right? I didn't have a dollhouse. I had Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and they were awesome. But she has a dollhouse. She has a dollhouse, and she has this magic dollhouse. And so she also has these little puppets and little stuffed animals and stuff, and she puts them all around, and somehow she's able to magically import herself into the life of that dollhouse. So it goes from being normal camera work to now it's suddenly a cartoon, and she's part of it, and she's there. And it's every kid's dream. It's kind of like that. The Creator stepped into the creation. The light came into the world. Just when it seemed darkest, the light was coming into the world. I mean, most gods that we hear about throughout history just don't care what's going on with humanity. Most gods from most religions in the world, they kind of stand off at a distance and they just wait to punish later. And they say, you need to start acting like this, and you need to start doing this, and you need to start doing this. And frankly, that's how a lot of us have learned to approach Christianity. But listen, what's the real story, the real headline of Jesus stuff is that Jesus came into the world while we were still sinners, while we were still far from God, while we wanted nothing to do with God. God said, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to take the initiative. I can't bear to be apart from him. Can't bear to be apart from him. And so John lays out who exactly this light is and what it looks like for them to come into the world. He says this, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. He became human. He became human and he lived like us. He felt every joy, he felt every low. He felt every sorrow, he felt every suffering, he felt every friendship, he felt every love. He felt these things. He was there with us. He knows what it is. He understands us. John goes on and says, we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. We've seen his glory. The Son. So now we understand that this Word is eternal, is creator, is light, is the Son of God. Both with God and was God. Truly God, truly human, full of grace and truth. Now sometimes we go over words like that and it's kind of like Christianese filler. You ever listen to a speaker and they always have a filler word or two? Most of us have them. Sometimes it'll be an Sometimes it's a okay, or a something like that. I'm trying to avoid all mine right now. And sometimes we read in books and they have these filler words and they get real flowery language and they're just throwing stuff in there. And we know this, right? Over the years, Christianity has developed its own Christianese language and they throw in some words, but that's not what's going on here with this idea of grace and truth, being full of grace and truth. In fact, this is a phrase from back in the Old Testament. Like you'll go back and you'll find it throughout the Hebrew Bible there. Over and over and over, you'll see things like grace and truth and loving kindness and stuff like that. These are all kind of going together. And in the Hebrew, they're two separate words, meaning grace and truth. And they're meant to always point to God's mercy, God's covenant mercy to us. God's covenant mercy to his people. So in the Old Testament, they go and they say, look, God has given us his law, and that is the sign of his covenant to us. And we have God's covenant mercy, that we often walked away from God. We often went away from God. But God, in his mercy, kept covenant with us anyways. He'd remove his hand of protection because he said, thy will be done. But he always took us back, and he was always working to bring us back. And the law was how we came back. So when we talk about full of grace and truth, now we're understanding that the Word is the Son of God who is bringing God's covenant mercy with him from the Father. And John goes on and brings it home here. He says, out of his fullness, that's that fullness of grace and truth, we have all received grace in place of grace already given. That grace that was already given, that was the law. That was the law. That was the covenant mercy of God showing up. That was it. And now John is saying there's a deeper grace, a bigger grace, something beyond that. And what is it? The law, verse 17, for the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth, there it is again, came through Jesus Christ. The law came through Moses. That first grace came through Moses. And now this thing through Jesus Christ supersedes it. He's telling us, he's revealing to us now who the Word is. Who the Word, who that light, who that Son of God is. It is Jesus Christ. So that concludes his prologue, and he goes on to tell the rest of the story in specifics. In 1928, a group of believers here in Orlando were looking around at how fast Orlando was growing and where it was growing. Around that time, from 1920 to 1930, Orlando grew from about 9,000 people to about 27,000 people. It tripled its civilians in 10 years. Now, I don't want to speak on behalf of city leaders today, but I'm pretty sure that they would tell you if that happened to us, they might get a little bit nervous. That's a lot of people to just show up out of nowhere. That's a lot of people to just suddenly, it happens. I mean, up until that time, Sanford had been bigger than Orlando, and now suddenly Orlando's bigger than Sanford. It's going to become more important, it's going to supersede it. And so these believers in downtown Orlando looked around at some of these surrounding suburbs and said, we need to plant more churches. There's more people here. And there are rough people. There are people who need Jesus. There are people who need to understand the love of God and the covenant mercy of God. They need to understand that only comes through Jesus Christ. We need to do something about that now. And so they said, we're going to plant a church in this suburb here outside of Orlando. And so they decided, they got together, 9 of them, and they planted a church. They planted that church, and they called a pastor, and that pastor lasted about 10 months. And then he left. They got a new pastor. He only lasted about 6 months. Oh, by the way, then the Great Depression happened. And it looked like the church was going to close down at one point. But they didn't. Some of these original members A couple of them had really deep pockets, and they gave everything they had to keep the church going and keep everything happening so they could continue ministering in their little suburbs. They could continue ministering in Orlando and telling people the story of Jesus and what Jesus could do and had done in their life. So they're without a pastor. It's the Great Depression. And the pastor who left said, hey, you should reach out to this guy in Washington State. He could be a great pastor for you. So they send the guy a telegram, and he sends one back and says, I'll be there in a few weeks, and I'll be your pastor. Sight unseen. He shows up here with his wife, and he stays for the next 10 years as pastor in one of the hardest, most difficult economic times in American history. And he guides them through some growth, and they grow to about 150 to 200 people, is something like that, which is incredible. And then World War II happened. And a lot of these guys started going off to war in Europe and Africa and Japan and in Italy. They're going all over the place. Again, it's uncertain times. Things seem unstable, but they're still saying, you know what we're going to do? We're going to keep ministering to our community. We're going to set up shop, and we're going to do everything we can to be the presence of Jesus here. And then World War II ended. They got a new pastor, and they started growing more, and they became a fixture. That church, that little church, was College Park Baptist Church, which later became Church on the Drive. I tell you all that because that's the prologue to our story. A church that no matter what happened, whether it was good times or bad times, kept being the presence of Jesus in their community. Wherever they found themselves, they kept trying to be the presence of Jesus, both here in the community and around the world. Missions and reaching people with the good news of Jesus has always been important in this church for 98 years. So as we step into 2026, I wanted to say this, that we're standing on the shoulders of saints who sacrificed a lot for us to be here in 2026, doing this together and telling the story of Jesus together. We also have a big responsibility for everyone who comes after us, everyone who could possibly come after us. We have a responsibility that we owe it to them to do everything we can to be committed to our mission as a church. And if you're unfamiliar with what our mission is, the reason we exist, it's this: we want to lead others in a growing relationship with Jesus. That doesn't mean that we're going to walk outside and we're going to proselytize to every single person who can hear us talk. It doesn't mean I'm going to give you a bunch of tracts to walk out and hand it to somebody like that, although I will if you want me to. Leading people in a growing relationship with Jesus is perhaps the best way I know how to say it. Because we're all on different parts of the path. Each one of us is on a journey with Jesus, and we're all in different parts. We're just hoping to meet up with each other from time to time as we go along and journey together. So sometimes what it looks like to lead somebody in a growing relationship with Jesus is you pray with them to accept Jesus and make Jesus the king of their life. Yeah, that's awesome. We want to do that. Sometimes it means that we sing beautiful songs from an amazing band on Sunday, and we hear a word spoken on Sunday, and we invite people to that. Sometimes that's what it means. Sometimes, though, it means praying with your kids, modeling the Jesus way with your children or your grandchildren or your nieces, your nephews. Sometimes it means you get involved in your local schools and you're the presence of Jesus in your schools and in local businesses and in hospitals where you may find yourself. Sometimes it means you go on mission trips and you support missionaries out there and you learn more about the global Christianity that's so beautiful and vibrant and wonderful. It can mean so many things. Sometimes it means you get involved with medical homes and homeless shelters. It can mean so many things to lead people in a growing relationship with Jesus, and they're all important. You should never say, well, I'm not a good speaker, so I'll never tell anybody about Jesus. Don't believe that. You got to be ready to defend your faith. You have to know what you think, and you have to be able to explain it to somebody. But you also have to be able and willing to go and serve others, to model this Jesus way. So in 2026, I want you to understand that everything we are going to do and not going to do flows from this. we continue to tell the story of Jesus. What I love about this church family is that we know who we are. We know why we exist. We know what we're here for. Some groups want to get out there and they want to become an arm of some social justice thing. Some want to become an arm of some political wing over here. That's not us. If you're looking for that, that ain't us. We are people who tell the story of Jesus with our lives and with our words. And we're going to continue doing that in our families and in our community. I hope that you'll think about that. I hope you'll think on what that means for you, how that works out in your life. Because as we head into 2026, if you're going to join with us in this, and I hope you will, you got 3 questions I think you need to ask yourself. First is, who will I share the story of Jesus with today? Not tomorrow, today, every day. And how am I going to do that? Who will I share the story of Jesus with? Secondly, how will I make someone feel welcome on the Jesus journey? You know, sometimes we get going in church and we're so used to our routine and seeing the people we want to see and all that. And we come into church and we sit down and we say, okay, happen to me, Jesus. And we do that and we forget that there's new people all around us. You ever walk into a church and nobody acknowledges your presence? That's the worst. That's the worst. Let it never happen here, man. But maybe there's somebody in your life who doesn't come to church here, but they're newer believers. Or they're somewhere on the journey. Man, they're trying to get back. They're on the fringes of things. How can you make them feel welcome in this Jesus following thing? Like they're not an outcast. Like there's somebody that God came for. Last thing, is there anything that needs to change in my life to do these things? Look, if you're going to start talking to people about Jesus, if you're going to keep telling the story of Jesus, you have to be believable. So if you go out and live like the devil, they ain't going to believe you. If you act like the devil because you get mad or you get frustrated, they're not going to listen to you about Jesus. If you don't take care of the poor, of the hungry, when Jesus says to take care of the poor and the hungry, they're probably not going to listen to you. We want to be people who continue to tell the story of Jesus in our families and in our communities. Would you let me pray for you over 2026? God, I thank you. Let my words today be a prophetic prologue for our 2026, that we look back at the end of this year and say, we did it. We did it. We continue to tell the story of Jesus in the way that it has to be told, in a compelling, persuasive way. Lord, help us to partner with you in everything that you're doing. Help our lives to exemplify what it means to make Jesus king of our life. Lord, I pray that you'd bless this 2026, that many would become sons and daughters, that many would find their way home. Lord, help us to be a blessing to our world and a blessing to you. In Jesus' name, amen.